the stick rig itself was pretty locked down. You really couldn't do a whole lot of stuff with it outside of just doing what we had. So this one I've unlocked. So I'm just going to save this as, so I don't screw up the original. There we go. This one I can actually grab and I can rotate the rig. I can move the rig in pretty much any direction. I still can't scale it because I didn't unlock that, because that would probably break stuff. We'll find out. But I want you to see how to do that, because obviously if you're animating stuff, it helps to have as many controls as possible opened up to you. Back to stick rig. Sure. Yes. Good. Okay. All right. So here's where it started originally. There's no animation on it. This is locked. I can't move it in any direction except for left and right. Because over here in the channel box, there's nothing else there. It's just that one attribute, okay? So under Edit, there's this thing called Channel Control. And what it allows you to do is see all the channels and be able to add channels, remove channels, lock channels, do a whole bunch of stuff. So if I go to that and I have that top piece clicked, it says keyable, non-keyable, non-keyable displayed. So in some cases, you may want an item that is not keyable, meaning that when you hit S, no matter what you have selected, you cannot set keyframes on it. Non-keyable hidden means it's not keyable and it's hidden. That's what those are. They're also locked, so I have to show that. So these are all the things that you can add to this. So I'm going to go down to rotate, and I'm going to move those over to the keyable section. I'm going to go down to translate. I don't really need translate Z. I don't think I'll ever move it like forward or back. The arms that are on top of, or are on this thing, are not really meant to swivel backwards too. They're basically meant for side to side stuff, so I would not really use that. So I'm going to move that over. Now if you look over here, you'll see translate Y, rotate X, Y, and Z are listed, but there's this little gray area right next to them. Okay, so now they are visible. They are keyable, but they're locked. Okay, so basically, even though they're showing, we still can't move them in any direction except for the one that we've specified here. Okay, so what I need to do is I need to go to locked, and I'm going to go and unlock it. Okay, so these are locked, these are non-locked. I go to my rotates, I go to my translate. I don't think I need Z. And I'll move that over to the other section. Okay, so now that little gray area disappeared. Now it's unlocked and it's keyable. So now I should be able to move this up and down, and I should be able to rotate it in any direction that I want, like so. Okay, so now this opens up the possibilities of other stuff that we can do with this rig. It's not simply left and right and that's all it can do. I may want to even have this thing go from, you know, let's say the ground, and it goes this way and then it flops over instead of hanging this way, right? So now I can do those kinds of things. If I don't want one of these, like I was saying before, we typically aren't going to move it this way, because these little pins here are side-to-side hinge type pins. They're not like a ball joint that can rotate in any direction. So I'm going to hide and lock that rotation here so that I don't accidentally do that, because that would be obviously a bad thing. So here's how you can change it. Instead of going to edit channel control, finding those attributes and moving them to the locked and hidden area, if you just right click on any attribute, you can tell it right here, lock and hide that selected. So now it goes away. Now nobody can grab it. You cannot, because it's not there anymore. You can unlock selected, but you can't unlock the stuff. You have to go into this thing here to actually get back to it, the channel control. Okay? Alright, so that's a nice thing to be able to do. Let me jump back to my other guy. Unlocked, not save. Perfect. Okay. So in this guy, I flipped him over upside down because I may want to create some animation that does that. I've also done a little bit of different animation to it. So our other one, our example, it comes in from the left and goes back to the right. Comes in from the left and then goes to the left. Yeah, that makes sense. So this one, he's just kind of like wobbling around. So now I have the ability to create a different kind of animation because his movement is now much different than it was before. Right? And so now, with just this kind of basic animation of him flopping, now I can create a whole different kind of style for what this little flipping thing is going to do, right? The process is going to be the exact same. So I just grab these. And again, I grab them in the order so that they make more sense. I watch the animation. Okay, so this is coming down this way. So I'm going to set a keyframe at near the beginning, like let's say 3. All right, then I'm going to go up a little bit. All right, now I'm at the end of this. Which direction should these have flopped as it was coming down? Which way? Behind it? It's not moving backwards. Right, so it should be going this way when it comes down, right? Okay, that back. Okay, so now we go this way. And then when it hits the ground, then it's going to swing this way. Yep. So now let's watch it. Maybe that's a little bit off, so let's just move that keyframe over a little bit. There we go. And then when it really takes off, I'm going to just really exaggerate that. Whoa. And now here's what's kind of neat about this one is that when it does hit that top part, it's still essentially going in the same direction. Maybe back a little bit further even, just because it's still going left. But when it hits the ground, it's really going to flop the other side. So right there, that's what it's going to take that turn. So I'm going to set a keyframe here. Maybe it's a little bit further back. And then right about there, I'm going to flop it. Actually, I'm going to go further. Right there. Flop it over to the side. There we go. Awesome. Now I want it to come to rest. So, let's see this again. Cool. So I'm going to have it come to rest. So I'm going to go to, let's say, this took how many frames? 61 to 75. I'm very analytical, so I like to count frames. So if it's 61 to 75, that's 14 frames. So the next transition should happen in less time because there's less movement. So instead of going 14 frames up, which would be 90, I'm going to go back. So I'm going to go to 85. That works. And then I'm going to rotate it back this way. And then this is only 10 frames, so I'm going to go down less than 10 frames and go the other way. And I'm going to go less than 7 frames. And then I'm going to go less than that. Like that. Okay. Okay. So now that's a hard object, right? Obviously, this is a hard, not very flexible object. It does move, obviously, when it's flipping around. But the fact that it's on an angle and it stays on that angle at the very end, that means that it's a pretty stiff object. That's the word I was looking for. Okay. So that's one way that we could do this one. The other way we could do this is obviously it doesn't get stiff again. It just like flops over still. It just kind of like goes this way and then it goes back that way. So it goes whoosh. And then right here, let me delete these. I'm just going to take this and just go. Actually, I'm going to make this really far like that. That way it kind of like sags into it. Okay, and let's just really exaggerate that even further and go here. There we go. So now it's not very stiff. Now we have, again, a different kind of animation, a different story we're telling. The properties for this specific item are now different because of what we've done to it. Okay? Sweet. All right. Yeah. We can even do further, right? So he's pretty sad, like you said. So he's still sad. But then maybe he lifts up his head a little bit. And then he stands up. select them in the right order. And then fix his head. I did not set a keyframe back here for all these other ones to be rotated back down. So you guys get back down here. Okay. That's cool. All right, so now I'm going to take this keyframe that's there, and I want to hold that a little bit. If you remember from what we watched last time, those 12 principles of animation, giving stuff the time for people to process it is important. If I just go from one action to the next action to the next action, you don't have time to process it. So right here, that's when he's sad, and you'll see that we have time to process that he's sad. So we make a mental note in our heads. And then he has this kind of like moment where he looks up. But I need that moment to stick a little bit longer. So I'm going to copy those keyframes. I'm going to scooch up a little bit, paste those keyframes, and then I'm just going to shift middle drag this and scoot it over. So now we have this, and now he has that moment where he is looking up and then standing up. And then just for fun, let's get him back on the ground because he's kind of like scared of heights. Let's go to that. Let's go to this. Rotate, move that down. Actually, I want to move that up. There we go. I have 2 keyframes. I need to delete one. There we go. All right. And then this is going to need to come up some. That. There we go. I'm fixing that keyframe. I did not set keyframes on all of these. This is one of the issues when you have multiple sets. You need to make sure you set all your keyframes, not just the one. Okay. So he comes in. And that's too high, so just scoot him down some. Alright, and then we're going to slam him down on the ground. And I'm actually going to copy this keyframe again and paste it there. So every time I'm copying these keyframes and pasting it, I'm basically putting in those little holds right there. So I want him to basically, he straightens up, he lifts up, there's a pause, and then he slams down. That's what I want to happen, okay? So it may be too long of a stop, we'll see. Yeah, definitely too long of a stop. Let's go and squeeze that in a little bit. Let me look at my graph editor real quick. There's something definitely funky happening in my rotate Z. Okay. Yep. So I had my animation here. I need to break my handle and squeeze that in. There we go. It was just too sharp inside my curve. There we go. That's much better. Cool. All right, that's good. Then I will go back, just like we did before. I animated the bottom, the body part of it, and then I came back and animated the little tentacles. So that's what I'm going to do now. So it comes up. Okay, now this time when he comes up like this, before the platform was kind of pushing him, so he kind of trailed behind the platform. Now that he's kind of in charge of it, he's going to push the platform. So I need to make sure that it looks like he's pushing it. And the way I get to look like he's pushing it is I give him a little bit of a presence here. I need to come back a second. I need to set a key on these guys, then go up And then give this a little bit of a turn there. Maybe this one could be just a little bit more rotated like that. That might feel better. There we go. So it feels already like he's actually like pushing it up, right? That's what we wanted. And now he slams down. So now we'll make him come to rest. So we'll go there. We'll set a key. And then we'll scoot up a little bit. And then we just kind of have a little follow through because he was already kind of facing this direction. Those hotkeys already, right? That's nice. Okay. I'm gonna grab all these pieces, hit S to set a key. Yep, now it feels like he's coming down. Add some more frames. And then we'll get him back up again. So a quick way to reset them all, I'm just gonna put this back to 0. And then scoot him over to that side. And then come back here. And then there. Back to 0. Okay. So now here's our animation. We may still need some tweaking. Yep. Good enough, right? So the purpose was we took that simple animation of just this thing sliding side to side, that same rig, and now we're able to give this character just a little bit more life by playing with some of these features, okay? By thinking about what do we want to happen, how do we want this story to play out, what motions are happening, and then just doing that exact stuff. Then we could go into the dope sheet, and then we can start playing around with these. Now, because this is a more complex animation, I can't simply grab number 4 and 5 and scoot them over a frame, and number 3 and scoot it over a frame. I actually have to grab sections of where I want that to happen and then scoot those over a frame. Okay, so basically when he is here doing this stuff, that's when I would want all that stuff to happen. But right there, now he's independent. Okay, so everything before 147, yep, everything before 147, I would want them to be offset. So I would go right here, I would grab these ones, I would scoot it over, I would subtract these ones, scoot it over, subtract these ones, scoot it over, subtract these ones, scoot it over. Okay, so now I still get that waviness. And then here we have the general stuff. Now right here at the end, again, I could go in with that and add some more of that. So right at 225 and on. That's what's nice about having the marker there, because we can see everything. I may not have set a keyframe for all my stuff right here. Let's grab that and set a key. Good. Okay. So now I can grab all of these, scoot it over a frame, grab all these, scoot it over a frame.
Scoot it over a frame. Are you pressing the right arrow key or something?
No, I'm just using the middle mouse.
Okay.
Okay. I'm in the move.
Moving it much, so
Yeah, I'm just using the move tool and then watching for that tick. And when it ticks over to the next frame, then it's good.
I didn't know if there was just one button.
No. Not that I know anyway. And these could happen a bit quicker. Let's go back to the dope sheet. That's way too much stuff there. So this cluster here, and again, this is what I love about the dope sheet, is that we can just squeeze these things in, and it doesn't take very much effort on our part. That last one was a little bit rough. A little more room on that. More room here. There we go. And we could play with that even further, adjusting and tweaking and whatever else. Okay. And then I could even go into the graph editor, which now look at all the stuff that we now have in the graph editor for this. Oh, because I did a bad thing. I set keyframes on this stuff. Let me delete those. There we go. Okay. So here's all my controls. Remember on the last one I went through and offset each one of those curves so that they each had their own dimension? You could do that here too. Okay. Because of how much stuff is going on, I would probably just limit it to this. The idea with doing those offsets is we don't want anything to look like it's matching up. So you know, like in the video, they said twinning is a bad thing, moving both sides of the body at the same time. Moving multiple things at the same speed is also a bad thing. So even if it's two objects that are not opposite each other and they're still moving at the same exact speed, that could be an issue too. So all of these that are moving the exact same speed, exact same motion, that's typically something you want to adjust. Okay, so that's one thing that obviously you can take this a little bit further. Some other stuff that is pretty handy are under display, under heads up display, I typically will have frame rate on. Okay, what this is going to do is you hit the play button and you're like, well, I don't know if this is real time or not. I don't know how fast this is actually going. So frame rate will display in the bottom right corner how fast it's actually playing. Right now I'm not playing anything, so it's not showing me anything. When I hit the play button, you can see that it's about at 30 frames a second. That's what my animation was set to. So I should be good at 30 frames a second. If it's not, I click on the little gear running guy, I go to my settings, and I change it to 30 frames per second. And I make sure keep keys at current frame is also on. Okay, I may have to reset my time also if that happens. What happened there? E? No. So that's obviously a handy feature. Another thing is visualizing, right? So sometimes you'll see something and you're like, I'm not sure where this is not looking right. So if I grab this item here and I go to, oops, not that, and I go to visualize and I go to ghost selected, what this is going to do is it'll actually create onion skins, like wireframe or dimmed out versions of this thing, so I can see exactly what it's going to look like. So I'm going to say custom steps, frame steps, and I'll go, let's say 6 before, 6 after, and my step size will be 1 is fine for now. Ghost. Okay. So if I go to my outliner, just so you can see this, that bottom thing that I selected is inside this group called main body control, and that is all of those controls for the body. Okay, so that's why right now if I zoom in, it's only showing me those pieces, right? So it looks kind of weird, but that's what it's doing. So I'm going to unghost that thing, and then I'm going to click on main object. What? Unghost all. There we go. Click on the main object and then do my ghost selected. And so now what it's going to do is it's actually going to show me frames before this and frames after it. That way I can kind of see where this is going and make sure that it's making sense. It's like the Matrix. All right. I may have been a little bit aggressive with that 6 before and 6 after. Let's just do like 3 before, 3 after. And I'll take my step size to 2. That way it'll do like every other frame 3 both ways. There we go. Okay. So now I can see what is happening with my stuff. So I can actually see like each area. This one right here, the green one, is the middle. These are the after, these are the before. So it really helps you kind of visualize what is happening inside of this, making sure you have nice fluid motion. Usually I use this for more troubleshooting just to see. Sometimes you'll hit a spot where you're not sure like which frame something weird is happening. By being able to see frames before, frames after, you're able to kind of isolate where that problem is happening at. Okay, so definitely something that can be handy. Cool, that should be that. When you do texture these things, because of how this is set up, you can't grab the geometry. Okay, and the reason you can't grab the geometry is because I don't want you to accidentally move the stuff that's inside here. In your layers, there's a geometry layer, and you see the R that's next to it. That is the reference indicator. So if I turn that off, I can grab the geometry, But here's the bad thing, is that you can accidentally move it, and now that thing is stuck way out there. Okay? So keep this reference so you don't move it, but use the outliner as your way to grab stuff that you want to animate. So inside here, I can go to base. There's my base. Go to assign new material. Because we're using Arnold for these, this is going to be pretty much the same thing that we did before. Don't go crazy with the colors. Remember, it has to be visually appealing. Base material. Okay. So for a lot of this, you can just pick some nice colors. If you think of, where's the internet? Superhero colors. So if you think of like superheroes, you can always pick colors that match them, right? So Superman has the red, yellow, and the blue. So you could pick red, yellow, and blue for this thing, and it makes it look kind of cool. I've had someone do coloring pages. Someone do an Iron Man theme, so it actually had like the red and the gold, and that turned out cool. And then I think they even added like blue to the center of them, which turned out pretty neat. Okay, so you can just kind of pick a color scheme that is already set up. You don't have to kind of pick 6 random colors that look hideous together. Maybe a little bit of metalness in there. Okay. We will use Arnold lights. So I'll use an area light for this. Let's see. Some other settings you may want to play with. So right now my light shape is a quad, so it's square. You could also change this to be a disc or a cylinder. Now if I were to render this under the Arnold render button, I get nothing, because I need to take this intensity up like crazy, like 300 maybe. Let's take the exposure up to like 20. There we go. Ooh, look out. 4. We're getting there. There we go. Okay. So with this set to quad, if you saw the light in here, the light reflection, it would be square shape. You may want it to look disc shape and have it be round. Okay, that'll also help change the shape of your highlights and shadows. Yep. You could also, if you do set this to quad, there's other sample or settings down here like roundness. So instead of it being a perfectly square item, you could round it and it'll actually round off that shape. You could also soften the edge, so now that edge is going to be blurrier instead of a harsh, hard edge. Okay. Remember, the idea with this is that we're trying to make this as visually appealing as possible without throwing a bunch of stuff in the way. Oops, I didn't want to close that. Okay. So I'm going to grab the background, which again I have to grab from my outliner. Background. I'm going to assign a new material. Now this is going to get annoying, assigning a new material every time, and then having to click this, and then having to click that. That's super annoying. If you right click on this, you can add it to your favorites. And what that means is, all I have to do is go to Lighting and Shading, assign Favorite Material, and there's the AI Standard Surface. So you're saving yourself a little bit of time by doing that. You could also, like we talked about before, I believe, right-click and do that. Boom. Okay, here is that highlight. You can see how harsh that is right there. I'm going to go back to my area light. I use this focus just to quickly navigate the stuff that I already had open. Here it is with no roundness and no soft edge. You can see how ugly that looks. Okay, here it is as a disc. Okay, so it changes the shape of that light to now a round disc. So it's just a matter of what you want it to be set up as. If you don't want it in there at all, you can take the specular off. And what that's going to do is now that light will not be part of the specularity. It'll just basically give off diffuse, which is just flat coloring. Okay. I think we talked about using color temperature before, where you can change this. Some of these you have to stop the player and then replay it. All of these you can animate too. Any property, if you right click, you can set a key on things. So if you were like, cool, I want to make this, he's sad, so I'm going to turn it blue, and then he's happy, I'm going to turn it orange. You can do that just by setting some keyframes. I do recommend changing your light color so everything isn't white. It makes your scene just a little bit more interesting in that sense. Alright, cool. If you want to focus on just this specific area, you can turn on a crop region. And basically that means I'm drawing a box around what I want to preview. I don't care what this looks like right now. I'm more focused on just this. So as I pick items from here, like my hinges, and then I go to my hotbox, go to assign favorite material, assign standard. Now I can go and pick a color. Remember too, we also have presets. I think I showed these before. So you can do car paint, replace. Boom. That looks good. And I can go to bar. Assign favorite. Yeah, standard. I'll do car paint again. But I'll just change the color. There we go. Whoops. Click the wrong button. There we go. Alright. So this is the bar material. Sweet. Okay. So let's pretend that looks good like that. Okay. It looks awesome like that. Just pretend it still does. So I can also take this light. I gotta turn off that render region now. And I can duplicate it and scoot it over here. Because now we have more of like a studio lighting setup. So you remember this from the intro class when we did like the cereal boxes. And because I have two lights in the scene, the intensity is going to come down some on one of the lights, probably both the lights. I'm also going to give the background a little bit of color too. I assigned a material to it, but I never actually gave it a color. That'll work. Good enough. Okay. So there we go. Awesome. Alright. So now for my camera move, remember, just like before, nothing crazy. It should show the animation. It should capture the essence of what you're trying to show off. It should not be an animation in and of itself. Okay? So here's the range that my character is moving. That's obviously important because I need to know where he goes. I could leave my camera exactly here. That would be fine. Okay? I just went to panels, perspective, and then I'm in this perspective, which is just my default camera, but I can make a new one if I needed to. Okay? You don't really need to make a new camera. It just helps if you're going to be moving around the scene a lot. Okay, so there again, oops, it's way out. So I want to make sure I stay away from the edges, make sure he's in there. There we go. Alright, so that is a sufficient camera. Now again, I could add some animation to this. I could add multiple cameras. I could have 15 cameras in here if I really wanted to, showing this thing from different angles. Okay, this is 270 frames. Okay, if that's 30 frames a second, how long is that? What was that? 30 frames a second, 270 frames. What was that? 9 seconds. 9 times 30 is 270. Right? So that's... I just forgot it. 9 seconds. So that's 9 seconds that we have. So you don't want to have like 20 camera shots in 9 seconds. That wouldn't make sense. But keep in mind, I may want to have 2 camera shots. I may want to have 3. It's all in what you want to do. If you decided you wanted multiple cameras, you may have one that's like up here. Never show this, like this corner. That's like a horrible thing. Don't show that. If you needed to, you can always grab that background and go to the scale and just go bloop. There we go. So now it's huge, so now we should have a problem. All right, so I'm going to click on my camera. I'm going to capture one of these motions here. So he goes like that, and then he comes up. Okay. So I'm going to start off here. I'm going to change my focal length on the camera. So if I set it to 20, it'll be a bit more perspective to it. And I'm just going to set a keyframe on all this stuff. Then I'm going to go up to where he is right there, and I'm going to follow him in. Okay, now he comes down first and then goes up, so I'm going to also do that. I'm going to come down. There we go. So he's cut off in some of them, but it's more of an action shot than it was a second ago where it was just a static camera. Okay? So I may like that. Like, cool, I love this camera shot. Boom, like that. So let's say this goes to frame 80. So I would call this camera 1 to 80. Lowercase 2. All right, then I would make a new camera. And then I would click on my resolution gate. And this camera, I want to capture that slap right at the camera. Sort of like that. Like, boom. Let me change my focal length to, say, 15. There we go. That's cool. All right. So now I'm going to go here, and I'm going to set a keyframe. And I'm going to go to, let's say, that's actually a really nice camera right there. Maybe 180. Okay, and I'm just going to move it slightly. And there's nothing wrong with having your camera move just a little bit. Okay, it doesn't have to move like a crazy amount, just to kind of give it a feeling like the camera is moving. Maybe down here I want to maybe come down a little bit further. And then again, I could rename this one. This one goes to about 180. So camera 2, 40 to 180. Okay, you get the idea of just setting up different kind of cameras. Then we can set up another one for like this end shot. All right, just go like that. Resolution gate. Start there. Oops. All right, now when he slams down here, I actually want to shake the camera a little bit. So I'm going to go 250 and set a key. Just move the camera a little bit here, move the camera a little bit there. A little bit more drastic movements here. There we go. It's a more powerful hit. Awesome. Okay, so now this goes to 280. Camera 3, 150 to 180 or 260 or 280. Cool. Okay. So now that we have that set up, now I would go through the rendering process. Because I have 3 cameras, I would go through, and if you're doing just a regular Arnold watermark render, you can set the stuff up inside here. Never ever ever render anything JPEG or GIF. That's like typically a horrible idea. Typically you want to stick to IF, you want to stick to PNG, or you want to stick to TIFF, Targa, or EXR. Okay. Typically, if you want to write down just one, I would say TIFF. Okay, if you're just writing down one of them. I'm using the Arnold renderer, so I click that. Oops, there it is. Oh, sorry. From Arnold, Targa is not listed, so I would just do, yeah, TIFF. Never mind. Yep. So I would do TIFF. Sarcona _ Now I'm going to right click and say insert camera name. Okay, so this is a handy thing that Maya has, where you can right click these flags in here, and when you render, it'll automatically rename your stuff as Sarcona _ camera 3 150 to 280. That way we know which camera rendered out. We don't have to go back and rename the cameras or anything. What was that? You just right click inside where the name is, and you can add all these different kinds of things to it. Even the date, which is kind of, I guess for big studios, sure. Name.number.extension, so that's the same as before. What was that? If you're only using one camera, you don't need that. But if you're using more than one, that's where that would come in handy. Now here's where it gets to be a little bit tricky. I'm going to go just say 1 to 280, right? That's our stuff. I can have multiple cameras render. So if I go to camera 1, I can have camera 1 render, and then I can specify camera 1's range. And I know it's range because I typed it in right there. So it's 1 to 80. So I could come in here and do 1 to 80, render out camera 1, and then it'll be done. And then I come back in and I choose camera 2, and then I do 40 to 180. And then I render that out, okay? Now, if we are on a day, let's say this is rendering super quick, I know that if I were to render this entire thing 3 times, it'll be done before the next class comes in, okay? This is what I would do. I would say my lowest frame is 1, my highest frame is 280. I would just add each camera into this mix. So now I have camera 1, camera 2, and camera 3. Each one of those I'm going to have a full sequence for. I just delete the stuff I don't need. Okay? So on camera 3, it's going to render out from frame 1 to 280. I don't need 1 to 150, so I could just trash those frames. But it's much quicker just to set it and let it go overnight than to have to manage each one of these things. Because if it finishes in 2 hours, then you're basically doing nothing until that 2 hours, until you come back in.
All your cameras at once, you can't really specify
A frame range, correct. Okay, now there are ways around this, but we're not there yet. Okay. What else? Yep, that's all good there. Cool. All right. Go to the Arnold renderer. We can probably take our camera AA up a little bit. Maybe take the specular up a little bit. I've noticed that on mine I've been picking up a lot more noise, so I'd crank that up. Yeah, that should be fine there. Yep, nothing crazy here. That's the same stuff. Okay. Yeah. All right. One more thing. I would turn on motion blur. Where'd motion blur go? There he is. Okay. So motion blur will play a huge role in this because there's a lot of movement with that stick flapping around that will really get some nice stuff happening. I want to do the end of frame. That's typically where I like to go. Take the length up to that. I'm going to preview it right there. So go to an action frame where something's happening, and that's where you want to look at the motion blur to see what does it look like. You may need to take the keys up, right, so that it goes a little bit more. Yeah, that looks like a sufficient amount of motion blur. Okay, cool. All right, so I'd leave it like that. Cool. So this is the watermark version. I go to my rendering, I go to render, and I say batch render. It'll render all 3 cameras and just do its thing. Okay? If I don't want the watermark version, I have to open up the Maya render view. Whoops. I have to right click here, make sure I know which camera I'm chosen on. Okay? If I've last rendered in perspective, it'll render out the entire perspective camera. That happened to a couple people during the first one. It rendered out the wrong camera. So we have to make sure that we right click, tell it which camera we want to render, 1 to 80. Once it starts, so I wait for a cube to pop in or a square to pop in. There we go. Hit escape. Then I can go down to my script editor, change this from start frame, end frame. There we go. And then I would just control enter, run that script again. Okay? And that'll render out that camera. And then because of how it's set up, it's most likely going to create the same exact files. It's not going to, like, let's say I render camera 1, then I come back and do 2, then I come back and do 3. It's going to overwrite stuff, okay, if there's any overlap. So you want to render out 1, grab those files and put them into a folder. Render out 2, grab those files and put them into a folder. Render out 3, grab those files and put them in a folder, okay? If I rendered frame 1, just so you can see this, I'll just do 1. And just so it goes quicker, I'm just going to take all my settings like really far down. And motion blur off. Alright, so I'm going to run the script. Okay, so now this should, so many windows, there it is. Animated stick, images, temp, view details. Maybe it won't, I guess we'll see. We'll see what it decides to name these as. Render till 1, I have to probably put 2. There we go. Recent projects, stick. 651. Oh, there it is. Alright, so there's number 1. Frame 1 popped out. Okay. So now I would pick camera 2. So I would go here. Oh, I guess it is going to do it, isn't it? Yep, so it is going to name it the right thing. Perfect. Alright, never mind. Ignore that. Sometimes it would overwrite it, so just ignore that. So we can just set this to whatever it is, 1 to 180, or 80 for camera 1. Render it out, then switch to camera 2, render those out, switch to camera 3, render those out. And then you won't have the watermark version of your stick animation. When you do these, make sure that your stick is visible. Some people like to be really far back on the stick. He's already super thin. So when you zoom far back, he can't be seen. So make sure you're close enough that you actually can see this in here, especially when we get into motion blur and this thing is whizzing across. If it's super tiny, you're not going to be able to see anything. Okay? And no crazy cameras. I think I've said that a couple hundred times. If you need reference again for what a crazy camera is, this is a crazy camera. But you're trying to follow every single motion that he does. He's here. It's an awesome shot. And then, oops. It goes down, I want to capture that, and then it comes up, I want to capture that. This is a cool angle, really close, yeah, that's awesome. And then, oops, what's that? It came out of frame, that's alright. Okay, down here, that. And, oh, that's where he's sad, I gotta get that in there. And then up here, zoom out probably. And, yep, he's on the ground now. Okay, crazy camera, here we go. Nope, see, he's out of frame right there, so I gotta zoom way out on that. There we go. That's good. Oops, he's out of frame there. I'll just fix that. It's out of frame again. I'll just center him again. So these are the crazy cameras because instead of adjusting the keyframes we have and adjusting the graph editor, people constantly just move the camera around and just set keyframes, thinking that that's cool, and it's not cool. Okay, look at how jerky the camera move is. It's just all over the place. And I can't really see the animation because the camera is just getting in the way of it, right? So that's like way too many keyframes for most cameras. All right. All right, cool. So that would finish up the stick thing. Wednesday, we're going to work on the stick thing, is rendering it out. If you're to that point, putting it together. Obviously, if I rendered out 3 cameras, I would go into After Effects. I would do basically like, here's 1, here's 2, here's 3. Maybe some blending between the 3 cameras. You could add sound effects to things. Whatever. Okay? In After Effects, you're not asking that question. I had you for After Effects. So you could add After Effects sounds, or sounds in After Effects.